Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker, back at you with another interactive class out of the secret library of the Connected Universe. Tonight, we're going to be talking about time in the simulation. What is time? Of course, you guys know me. I say time doesn't really exist in the simulation. We've talked simulated universe before, so how do these two things relate to each other? Yes, part of my new book that's going to be coming out here a little bit later this year, Travels Through Time. Getting so close to having that finished. Oh, yeah. Sequestered myself into, my house this past weekend. But I cut off social media over this past weekend to really knock a lot of things out. And so let's get to this. Those listening to the podcast version later, please join us every Wednesday night. I know it's a Tuesday. We're doing this live tonight. That's because of my schedule this week. But please join us every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time for the full Connecting the Universe experience at connecteduniverseportal.com. 30-day free trial, but gives you access to the weekly Connecting the Universe interactive class, sneak peek behind the scenes videos, monthly Q&A videos. Just posted 25-minute Q&A video yesterday. Exclusive articles, insider travel blogs, or vlogs. I always have blogs written here, but it's vlogs because it's those videos. Ancient Egypt, America, Southwest, Ireland, and more. All this at connecteduniverseportal.com. By the way, those who are members, get the app. You can get the notifications right to your phone. You can interact right there through the app and let you know, hey, when we're doing stuff, we're going live, all that fun stuff. And we have done some live Mike's Morning Mugs videos there within the portal as well. So do want to let you know, I have several events coming up here. Parapsychon in Mansfield, Ohio. That is May 20th and 21st. Ohio State Reformatory. Come by the table there. Also, the Bell Mansion event. That's the Connecting the Universe official event. It's basically a full day of presentations getting into esoteric knowledge and wisdom. Wonderful haunted location, too. So real treat there. Bell Mansion, June 10th, Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then, of course, next year, Egypt. We are going back, Stargates of Ancient Egypt Tour 2. You can find all this information out on my website, MikeRicksecker.com, in the events and tours section. So, all right. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay. What is a simulation? I just rocked the table here. Simulated that. So, we have talked about this before within the class, but for those who are new, simulation, what are we talking about here? Oh no, there's Matrix stuff. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times when we talk like simulated universe, many of us immediately think of the Matrix, which is, a simulated environment of the late 20th century. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. And I throw this out there just because it kind of validates what I'm talking about, I guess. I do have a degree in simulation programming. So, I mean, I've been involved with computers ever since I was a little kid, professionally for the past 30 years, more than now. Yeah. So, dating myself here. In any case, so what exactly is this thing that we call a simulation? While I do have a degree in simulation programming, I'm actually going to defer, and I do this in my Walk in the Shadows book when I have the Shadows in the Matrix chapter, which talks about, okay, if we are living in a simulated universe, what would a shadow person be within that? But of course, I have to first define exactly what are we talking about when we're talking simulation, simulated universe, all that sort of thing. So I'm grabbing this from Braden. He is a best-selling author, consciousness literature, a lot of shows there in Gaia. I did on the Connected Universe portal description, I did go ahead and put a link to Gaia in there where you can find all of his stuff. It's got tons of material on there, but his one specific show, Missing Links, dives into this. And he actually has a background in technology as well. He became the first technical operations manager for Cisco Systems in 1991. So that was basically what, maybe a year before I actually started working on Cisco routers up in Alaska. But he was also a 2020 nominee for the prestigious Templeton Award, which was established to honor outstanding individuals who have devoted their talents to expanding our vision of human purpose and reality. So those are his credentials. Um, I do highly recommend following him and checking out his stuff. But he states in the episode, Evidence of Our Simulated Reality, he says, a simulation is an experience that allows us to immerse ourselves in an unfamiliar environment first. And second, it allows us to master the parameters of that environment in a relatively safe way while minimizing the risk of injury to ourselves or to one another. So really, think of simulation. Now, this could be, we immediately think of like, okay, video game environment. The Sims is a perfect illustration of that, where it is a simulated life. But really, we have flight simulators where people train. There's even for like driving and things like this. We use simulations in a lot of different capacities, not just online gaming. Military especially uses a lot of different simulation and training environments. But we see these all throughout, all throughout our sciences. We put together simulation models of, different natural events that could happen, flooding, earthquakes, volcanoes, what would happen if, this went off. And, so the computer simulates, what would happen if the earthquake hit here or a volcano erupted over there? What might that look like? And what it'll do is it'll run it through thousands of times, and you kind of end up picking the averages of, well, we ran this simulation 1,000 times. This is, sometimes it destroyed the whole world. Sometimes it was just a little bit of damage, but on average, here's what happened. And they do this in sports too. They'll run through, seasons worth of, if this team had this lineup and that team had lineup, and, the season was, this schedule, how would it turn out? And that's where people end up using that for sports betting, but we're not going down that route. Any case, so this is the idea of what a simulation is. But let's take this a little bit further. So something that strikes me about his statement is mastering parameters. And this is something that we hear a lot when we talk reincarnation, or when different belief systems talk about reincarnation. They often state that we come down to this world to learn a lesson or a series of lessons. We keep returning lifetime after lifetime to learn more and more, lesson after lesson, until we ascend to some higher level of consciousness, which again really sounds like mastering the parameters to me. That, if we are learning something, and that's part of what the simulation environment is. If you take, again, like a flight simulator or something like that, you're trying to master those parameters within that environment. Well, that's what we talk about when we talk reincarnation, in the recurring cycle. We come down here, we learn some lessons, go back up, come down again, learn some lessons, go back in this again and again and again. It's like you're rebooting the program every time, or you're reinserting your character into the program every single time. Of course, this is supposed to be time in the simulation. We'll get to the time aspect in just a moment. So Sarah asks, if a simulation is considered practice, does that mean there is a true reality that the simulation is mimicking? Many religions promote the idea of alternate realities, such as heaven, etc. So this is where we could get into like the Hermetic philosophy of as above, so below, that this is a mirror image of whatever is above, that I call it the kind of quote unquote homeworld, or where the simulation is being run from. Some people call it heaven. Some people call it the afterlife, whatever. If you look at, and I should have known this question was going to come up, and I should have provided the illustration. But actually, if you look behind me on the wall, if I can move my finger the right direction, you have, here it is, as above, so below, right there on the cork board. The interesting thing about that is the below part is not in as clear of focus. It's a little bit darker, it's a little bit more muddled, it's a little blurrier. It's not as pristine as the above part. So, yes, it is to a degree supposed to be mimicking whatever is the quote unquote above, but it's not as clear of an image. It's not as good of an environment. And it could adhere to the whole idea that, okay, we're down here learning something, and in order to learn something, we need to be in an environment that is not perfect, that has its flaws. And so that's what we see in that image, as above so below, but not perfectly. All right, so I'm going to continue on a little bit with some of Braden's comments here on this. So here's Gregg again. So he says the characteristics of a simulated world. Simulation has a place where it begins, a definite beginning, and it has a place where it ends. And what happens in between that beginning and the ending is based on a mathematic algorithm, a rhythm of cycles and patterns that repeat again and again and again on different scales. In a simulation, there are rules that govern the simulation. And the idea is that as the people in the simulation become more familiar with the environment, as they learn those rules, life gets better. They improve with practice. In a simulation, the users always have access to an external reality that they can tap into for guidance if they get into trouble or if they need clarification. They always have the ability to communicate beyond the simulation itself. And in a simulation, the user cannot tell the simulation from the real world. So let's kind of dissect that a little bit, the end part there. Let's kind of explain how simulation works. But the idea that there is always access for help, for clarification, that sort of thing. So if you're in there you go, like a computer game environment, this was the Matrix Online many years ago. If there was a problem within that environment, like if I got stuck, if something was glitching out, some sort of issue, or even if just general feedback, hey, I think that this level was dumb or whatever, I could just type in /help, and that would bring me to a help screen. I could contact somebody, contact customer support, that sort of thing. And so is true of other type of simulation environments. If you have some sort of issue with the simulation, you can reach out to customer support, file a complaint, get some assistance, that sort of thing. Okay, so what do we have here in Braden's thing? He has a lot of material on prayer, manifestation, this sort of thing. So this is the idea of, sure, you could be praying to a deity, spirit guides, that sort of thing, where you are looking for help outside of the physical to try to ask for help. Like, hey, guides, what do I need to do here? Tarot cards, whip out the cards and we'll see what they have to say. You're looking for some sort of external guidance to help you within here. So, not, it's basically our version here within the reality as we know it, that you could simulate in a computer. And I don't believe that we're in a computer environment. And in the book that I'm writing, and I say this in A Walk in the Shadows as well, in that particular chapter, I don't believe we're in a computer as we know it to be. I think it's something that's more biological and organic. We always kind of revert to, well, it must be whatever our highest concept of technology is at that time. So that must be it, because that's as far as our imagination has gone. And in my notes, I think we do touch on that a little bit there. And yeah, Sarah. Asking for divine help is like asking for user mod help. Yep, absolutely. Exactly what we're talking about here. Okay. So let's get into a little bit of the technology aspect of it. I'm not going to go too techie on you. I know there have been times where I've actually thrown computer code at you guys, and things like that. I'm not going down that route. There's a couple weeks in a row there I was throwing math at you guys. No, we're not doing that. But we are going to talk a little bit about like digital consciousness sort of thing. This is from quote from technological, or I'm sorry, cosmologist, theoretical physicist, and mathematician John D. Barrow. He says, it has long been recognized that technological civilizations, only a little more advanced than ours, will have the capacity to simulate universes in which self-conscious entities can emerge and communicate with one another. So he may very well be describing the universe which we're already experiencing, created by something far more advanced than we can really currently perceive. Whether that's a civilization of higher technology or being or beings of expanded consciousness, it's kind of beyond our comprehension. We have a lot of different ideas about what that might be. We talk about God. We talk about the universe. We talk about energy. There's a lot of different beliefs as far as what that really is. A higher power, higher beings, higher self. Notice it's always higher, as above. But we don't know. Nobody really truly knows what that is. And this is kind of like one of the great debates of our world is, what is that? And then there are those that just believe we become worm food, but that's a tale for another day. So Carl Jung once stated, the real picture consists of nothing but exceptions to the rule. Therefore, absolute reality has predominantly the character of irregular. Can't even speak. The character of irregularity. So let me read that again. Absolute reality has predominantly the character of irregularity. It's too many LYs, Young. Geez, predominantly the character of irregularity. I'm done. Irregularity. This is like, and Jen knows down there, me trying to say documentary. There are some words or letter combinations that my tongue just stumbles over. Irregularity. Try one more time. Absolute reality has predominantly the character of irregularity. There we go. Okay. And I threw up a tree here on the screen. Why did I do that? And for those listening to the podcast later, please join us, connecteduniverseportal.com. You can get the slideshow here too. All right. There's something within the human subconscious that inherently knows there is variety to life and quite a degree of unpredictability. This is why no one tree, or let me try this again. This is why no tree. This is a snippet out of my book, so that's why I'm stumbling over it. This is why no tree, even though it may be of the same genus and species, and may have sprouted at the same time in the same conditions right next to another, will ever look truly identical to the other trees of its kind. Variety is the spice of life, but really it is the truth of life. It constantly bends and breaks the rules. So, here's a couple of trees that we're looking at, grown right next to each other in the same environment. They grew very differently. I mean, one's a little bigger than the other. You can tell that they're the same type of tree. Branches kind of sprout in similar ways. The leaves are the same, but the way the branches branched out are different. The way the trunk grew is different. That they're never going to be exactly the same. Here's a couple more here too. What's interesting is in simulation environments, one of the things that computer programmers will do is called seeding. And basically what that means is they're given a set of parameters for, and we could just take a tree like this if we're putting trees into a simulation environment, because they don't want them to look exactly the same. They want them to look realistic. 25, 30 years ago, this was a little more difficult, and you would have ka-chunk, 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 the same graphic thrown down, because they just didn't have the computing power back then, the graphics power to really handle that sort of thing. But these days they do. And so have a number of different parameters. Could be based on density of leaves, could be based on how old the tree is, branch density, this sort of thing. And they'll put in some different numbers like 1 through 1,000, and whatever that number is the seed. And then the computer will just build a tree based on that. And so you would have each of these trees seeded a little bit differently. And so that would create randomness within the world, because there's something that humans inherently know, that there is not out in nature. Everything is not going to look perfectly exactly the same. It may look similar, but not everything is exactly perfectly the same. When that happens, it's like something's wrong. Something's off here, and that breaks the simulation environment. It's interesting in the movie The Matrix, when the architect was explaining to Neo the different versions of the Matrix, the previous ones. And he says, the first one that I built was an absolute pristine, perfect world, but nobody would believe it. It's like, we need this variety. We need these differences in order to actually believe things are real. Comments coming in down here. You guys are laughing over me stumbling over my words. Yes, I did it. All right. So, okay. And Sarah, do you think that AI will eventually break the consciousness code? Good question. You had a similar question during the AI class that we did a few weeks back. Will AI have empathy? And I did address it in that class. And I actually, for the monthly Q&A video, I touched on it there as well. So if you haven't watched it, go ahead and give it a peek. But I will go ahead, and since you asked, we'll touch on it here. And that is, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to really know. And the reason why I say that is because you can program a computer to respond in kind to emotional moments. So if I got in a car accident, I said, hey, I won't say her name, the A person over here, that sounds like Alex. If I said I got into a car accident, then the computer could be programmed based on that information to say, oh, I'm sorry to hear you got in an accident. Are you hurt? Which basically shows some empathy. My ancestor, my I don't know, aunt, uncle, whomever passed away. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. My condolences to you. That sort of thing. And so we can program a computer to respond to those type of statements. Is that showing empathy? No. It's a part of the programming. So there are some lines that can be blurred here. They're going to be blurred here at some point. The television show Westworld really kind of hit on this pretty well, in that the robots had gotten so adept at being able to recognize and respond to emotion that it was becoming harder and harder to tell if they were real or if they were still a robot with artificial intelligence. And so it kind of makes you ask that question: where does consciousness really come into play here? So I think we're going to be challenged on that in the future. It's going to be an ethics question that comes up somewhere down the road, when we have an AI really well established that seems completely real. But how will we really know because somebody programmed it to respond like that. So yeah, it's going to be difficult when that happens. So all right, let's move on a little bit here. We do have to ask, what powers the simulation? What is behind it? So consider there is a quote unquote real world outside of our own, far beyond the dimensional boundaries of the physical universe. It might not be a computer, but there is some sort of mechanism that we don't quite understand, which has brought our consciousness into this world. And there's really no shame in that lack of understanding as far as, what it is that did that. We've been trying to figure this out for thousands of years, right? But take, for example, Tesla, Nikola Tesla. He perfectly conceptualized where his automaton was heading. The automaton was basically a drone that he created. It was a tiny submarine that he was able to control with radio waves. Far ahead of its time. And he basically surmised that this thing, really was going to become an artificial intelligence. He didn't use that word back then, but this is essentially where he was going with it. He just, in his day, it was, gears and radio waves and moving parts. He didn't know about the silicon microchip back at that time. The technology that we have today would actually be the backbone of whether it's a simulation, whether it's electronic devices, but he knew enough that these things were going to happen. So the fact that we don't know what it is that powers the simulation, what is made our consciousness able to access this world, a lot of our ideas talk computers these days, and I don't think that's it. Again, back in his day, Tesla was like, yeah, it's going to be, gears and electric power. Sure, I guess he got that part, but he didn't have the microchip back then, and that's what we have going on today. So I think it's something far, far more advanced. So nothing that Tesla threw out here. We did kind of touch on this stuff some weeks back. They did believe that our lives were controlled from an external source. You could say jacked into the matrix, so to speak. And this was a concept that we really didn't develop for, really 100 years after he was, after he first proposed these ideas, and it became a pop culture sensation, of course, in 99. This is what he said about AI. He kind of conceptualized robots, conceptualized AI, artificial intelligence, but this was back at a time where they were talking automatons. So he says, long ago, I conceived the idea of constructing an automaton which would mechanically represent me and which would respond as I do myself. Such an automaton evidently had to have motive power, organs for locomotion, directive organs, and one or more sensitive organs so adapted as to be excited by external stimuli. Whether the automaton be of flesh and bone or of wood and steel, it mattered little, provided it could provide all the duties required of it like an intelligent being. So he's talking a robot with AI here. He just couldn't see ahead enough for what that really looks like today. But he was far, far ahead of his peers. His peers couldn't even imagine that. So just the fact that he was imagining it 100 years ahead of his time is absolutely fascinating. But yeah, everybody, and it's a shame. He was basically, laughed at by his peers for these ideas, and he had a hard time getting funding because, they're all, working a few miles in radio, and he's like, I got that figured out. We're going to do stuff all the way around the world, and just that, they're like, what are you talking about? No. That's too ambitious. It's too big. No, what do you mean the whole world? No. Of course, years later, what do we have? we could talk to anybody across the world, and those are the things that he would talk about. It's like you'll be able to, pick up a transceiver and be able to communicate instantly to the other side of the world. What are you talking about? Yep, we do that today. So many things. All right, moving on. So, okay, if we're jacking into the matrix, if we're entering into the simulation, what are we entering in with? Okay, our consciousness. And, for some years now, science has not been able to quantify the consciousness, which is why we have so many people think that we're just worm food these days. That we live, we die, and that's it. But you've had, religion and spirituality and, customs from cultures all over the world for thousands and thousands of years telling us that no, there's a soul, there's a consciousness, or there's multiple parts of the soul, depending on the belief system. And it's like when science finally started taking over, they kind of pushed that away, because there was that massive divide back in history. And really, it's the religious zealots that kind of ruined it. I mean, they work hand in hand, really, in my opinion. But you had the religious zealots that would just, literally assassinate these people for, having some scientific beliefs. So naturally, of course, once the science starts to take over, they're going to push away, maybe not necessarily assassinate, but at least push away, those from religion and spirituality. It's like, guys, can we work together here? Some finally are starting to mesh these two together. And so we talked about this at one point in time, an article that came out here. And actually, the idea's been around for a while, but as more tests are being done and as more research comes to light, it gets modified a little bit. But essentially, researchers suggest the human soul doesn't die. It returns to the universe, returns to the source, is the Matrix term for it. So in an update to their quantum theory of consciousness, Stuart Hameroff, an American physicist in emeritus in the Department of Anesthesiology and Psychology, and Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist at Oxford University. I need to put Hameroff's, because this is a direct quote out of my book. I need to put his school. Darn it. But basically, they've meshed together science and spirituality, likening the human consciousness to a software program activated by the bioquantum computer inside the brain, which continues to exist after death and returns to the cosmos. While this theory was originally proposed in 1996, the 2014 update states that quantum information within microtubules in the cells of the brain can't be destroyed, and it just distributes and dissipates to the universe at large. So again, they really don't define where in the universe, where in the cosmos it goes, but they do say it has to go somewhere. And so this is that idea. We talk, connected universe, right? A connected universe. Everything's connected. It's all out there. Could it be when we talk as above, so below, the home world, when we pass away, that sort of thing? Yeah, that could absolutely be it. Now, if it goes beyond the cosmos to another level, another dimension, outside of our known universe, then that would also, of course, take it outside of time, which is where all this is kind of getting to. This is time in the simulation. How do those things work together? And when we go down into stacked time theory, of course, we start talking about, all time is working concurrently, past, present, future. And somebody that's outside of that, somebody that is outside the simulation would be able to see the entire simulation at the same time. They would know the beginning. They would know the end. They would know all those steps in between. Now, maybe how they get from point A to point B is a little bit different, and that might kind of change the path a little bit. But we know where the program starts and we know where the program ends. and we know a lot of the main points in between. And I believe as we're able to kind of move up and down the stack, we're able to change some of the things, because the question always comes up, okay, so if everything's always there, what happens with free will? And I think that's when some of these unusual things will start to happen, like a deja vu or like a Mandela effect or something like that. Something's off, something just isn't quite right here. Something doesn't jive. A memory might change. A very, very distinct memory might change, or you go to that place where that memory is at and everything is like gone or completely different. It's like, what in the world happened here? So when we go back to like the Matrix, and they have what they got a quote unquote glitch in the Matrix. That's when the machines, the programmers, the architects of the Matrix have changed something, and we see, like the same cat move back and forth. They've added bricks to the windows when they had previously been open, stuff like that. All of a sudden something will suddenly change, and it will look as if it's always been there. So those sorts of things. This also extends to not just us. Again, we're all connected. Also extends to the planet, and I liked this one. So the team working on this, astrobiologists suggest the Earth itself may be an intelligent entity. Team working on this published a paper exploring this question in the International Journal of Astrobiology. In it, they present the idea of planetary intelligence, which describes the collective knowledge and cognition of an entire planet. Here's the abstract of it. They say, in this paper, however, we wish to broaden the view of intelligence by taking a planetary view of its appearance and effect. Here we consider the ways in which the appearance of technological intelligence may represent a kind of planetary transition. In this way, it might be seen not as something which happens on a planet, but to a planet. Our approach follows the recognition among researchers that the correct scale to understand key aspects of life and evolution is planetary, as opposed to the traditional focus on individual species. A little bit of a mouthful, but basically the connectedness of everything within the planet. And of course, this extends out to the universe. I think keeping it small scale right now, let's work on the planet right now. We'll expand out to the universe, but it's that symbiotic relationship. What happens to one happens to the other. It might happen a little differently, but it will affect the other beings and the other entities on the planet. So everything is very much all connected. There is a consciousness that is existing amongst all of these things. Imagine going outside and suddenly there's no birds. You don't hear any birds. That would be very disconcerting, actually. If you think about that, dead silence when you walk outside, when you're expecting, where's all the animals, right? So there's a relationship there, even though it might be on a very minor level. Everything is still all connected. And that's, of course, what we see here with the connected universe. And you guys know I love this photo from the Chandra X-ray, which basically took an X-ray. It's an X-ray telescope. It took an X-ray shot of the universe, and all of those yellow dots there are galaxies, and you can see the filaments of gases connecting all of them together. So they are all connected. What's interesting about that? This here is neural network of the brain. So kind of makes you wonder, are we inside of a giant brain, or at least something that may work a little similar? It's possible. Basically, what we're getting at here is that there is a world beyond our basic five sensory perception, some realm or dimension that has created this world as some type of simulation. In that world outside of us, since, of course, this is a work on time, would not experience our concept of time in the same manner as this material plane of existence. Yes, I'm reading from my new book again. Giving you guys a little taste of it here, really. So the rules of the simulation govern the simulation environment and not the world from which a simulation is run. So basically, think of all the fantastical things you can do in a video game that you can't do in real life. The rules within the simulation pertain to the simulation itself. And you can make it do all kinds of crazy things that you wanted to, or you can make it do a whole lot of nothing. But it's separate from what you can do here in the world. But usually you try to make it, as similar as you can, running, jumping, walking around. You might enhance that a little bit because if you're like with a game environment, maybe you want your characters to jump far or high or, hit bricks that turn into mushrooms or what have you. But likewise, our extra dimensional homeworld, that as above, whatever you want to call it, our extra dimensional homeworld operates on a different set of rules than this one, and that includes time, which is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. All right. Let's talk about Socrates here for a moment. Actually, let me see what you guys have for comments here first. So Sarah says, since the information was initially stored in microtubules, in theory, there should be a method of recapture. So there is. And it's kind of beyond our conversation for today. We have talked about it before. Collective unconscious. We talk about people capturing information that's kind of floating out there. Why do some people, like we've seen this with inventors over the years, all of a sudden there's like 5 guys trying to invent a light bulb. Well, where did this idea of let's suddenly try to invent a light bulb come from? All of a sudden, all these people are trying to do the same thing at the same time. Why is that? We'll get into that a little bit more in another discussion. We explore consciousness again. We have talked about that before when we've explored consciousness. But yes, there is information out there that you can access, and the Akashic records would, or something that's a part of that as well. That's free floating and out there. So basically, okay, let's say your consciousness goes back to the universe. All the knowledge that you picked up along the way is also out there. And in to a degree, because we are all connected, we're all able to share that knowledge to a degree as well, which is why I think sometimes you have a lot of people that are strangely simultaneously working on different things or working on the same thing at the same time. So, but that's a consciousness discussion. We'll get into that again one of these days. So Socrates, he has this. It's a cyclical argument, is what they call it. And so this is basically his examination of the universe using duality, again, as above, so below, within the natural world to make a case for reincarnation in the recycling of life. That just as the souls of those in the underworld come from those who are living in this world, living souls must come back from those who had previously been dead. So we're going to run through these real quick. There's 5 points that he has here. 1, all things come to be from their opposite states. For example, something that comes to be larger must necessarily have been smaller before. So if you're getting larger, you had to have once been small, or at least smaller than you once were. So 2, between every pair of opposite states, there are 2 opposite processes. For example, between the pair smaller and larger, there are the processes of increase and decrease. 3, if the 2 opposite processes did not balance each other out, everything would eventually be in the same state. For example, if increase did not balance out decrease, everything would keep becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, like Incredible Shrinking Woman sort of thing. And on and on and on and on. Of course, you never get to 0. If you keep cutting in half, cutting in half, cutting in half, cutting in half, you never do get to 0. But it doesn't ever balance out either. 4, Since being alive and being dead are opposite states, and dying and coming to life are the two opposite processes between these states, coming to life must balance out dying. And then 5, therefore, everything that dies must come back to life. So it's a you could say one can make a case. Yeah, it's an interesting twist on words, and we explored that before a few weeks back when we talked about cheese. Remember that when we talked about the cheese paradox? It's basically our paradox class, and it's using the transitive property. I'm throwing math at you guys again. So it's a transitive mathematical property. If A equals B, then C equals, and on and on. And the reason why it became such a paradox when we talked about cheese, which basically took more cheese equals less cheese, is because in our minds we're like, that doesn't make any sense. How can more cheese be less cheese? But mathematically, it worked out that way, and that's what's going on here with Socrates as well. This is basically, that mathematical paradox that we had with the cheese that we're actually seeing here in his cyclical argument. He's using it between dying and coming back to life. If one dies, one must come back to life. And so, if we are talking simulation that is based on a set of principles, and again, not necessarily a computer, but everything in nature is based on math. When you look at, the golden ratio, phi, which we see in our nautilus shells, and we see in all kinds of different aspects of nature. If we're talking, math here encoded into nature, then this makes complete sense. It's something that is mathematically embedded into us. So then, therefore, mathematically, there has to be this place in the cosmos that we go to, which again would be like the home world of the simulation. All right, Aristotle. We're hitting the big guys from Greek philosophy. So again, we're taking this back to time. And Aristotle states the following considerations would make one suspect that time either does not exist at all, or barely, and in an obscure way. He wasn't a believer in absolute time, but more along the lines of what we would call, quote unquote, relative time, which is what Einstein in his special theory of relativity defined as the rate at which time passes depending on your frame of reference. What we know of time, this is according to Aristotle, what we know of time is now, the present, and according to Aristotle, the now is the link of time, as has been said, for it connects past and future time. And it is a limit of time, for it is the beginning of one and the end of the other. So it's a little wordy there. He's just trying to hash it out. And actually, if you read this, it's his book on physics. You can kind of hear the gears grinding as he's trying to kind of mesh through this. Okay, if time is this and now is that, and how does all of this? He's working through it. It's like he's working through it as he's writing it. Let's continue on a little bit here. So in the ancient world, celestial bodies such as sun, moon, stars, that provided a way for humanity to negotiate the numbers for keeping track of time. So Aristotle observed here, if there were more heavens than one, the movement of any of them equally would be time. So there would be many times at the same time. And I remember when I threw this one at you guys, it was sometime last year. Yeah, the idea of many times at the same time. This was back during our real time travel class. So we're seeing a concept of layering time, much like we do when we talk about stacked time theory. So Aristotle not only allows here for all time to be concurrent, but he has also vaguely introduced the idea of either multiple dimensions or multiple universes when he says if there were more heavens than one. So if we talk about multiverse, okay, now there could be multiple universes within the simulation. If the simulation is the overarching thing that controls it all, there could be multiple universes. And so we're talking in theoretical physics, they allow for the idea of multiple physical universes. And so they kind of talk about it like a bubble universe, for lack of a better description of it. But basically, each of these has their own physical properties, chemical makeups, these sorts of things. Some die out quicker than others because of some whatever chemistry is involved, nuclear forces, these sorts of things. So some might not have enough to even get started. Some might have too much and flame out too quickly. And then, the Goldilocks zone, and just right. And that's our universe. So there's a lot of things that have to happen, not just for our planet being in the Goldilocks zone of our sun for life to take shape here, but our universe has to have all the right physical properties in order to even be going as long as it has, 14 billion years. So that said, when Aristotle is talking about more heavens than one, so he's talking about more than just the stars and the planets and things like this that we see in the sky. He's talking about beyond that. He's talking about some universe above our universe. He's talking about, he really couldn't put it into words at the time because they didn't really have those type of words for us, but he's talking about the simulation, the thing that governs and controls this. And that would include time as well in his description here, and his take on time. If there are more heavens than one, the movement of any of them equally would be time. So it'd be many times at the same time. So in our ancient cultures and religions, they do talk about a simulation. But like with Aristotle here, he can't use that word. It's not a word that they really had. They use different terms, like the ancient Hindus. They talked about the Maya, the illusion. So this is everything that is around us is the illusion. Even when you look at Christianity, they talk about we are down here preparing to go to the next world. They even have not too many, but a couple illustrations of things that happened before coming down here. And one could also make a case that a lot of those texts are lost. Anytime we found one, we're like, oh, hey, that actually adds a lot to the story there. There is a lot that we've lost to time. So, the ancients knew the concepts. They just don't have the terminology that we use today. And years from now down the road, there will probably be an even different terminology that will be used to describe whatever it is that is going on out there. That we've tried to make sense of it over the millennia. Heaven, the afterlife. The Egyptians called it the duat. As they left this world, they headed off to the different parts of the soul, headed off to the constellation of Orion. They knew that the soul was leaving her here. It was going off somewhere else. And they revered the constellation of Orion. Ancient alien theorists have proposed that, well, maybe that's where we came from. That's where humans came from. Okay, maybe. But I also think that, well, for one, I do believe that humanity came from somewhere else. But aside from that, they knew that the consciousness, the soul, the stuff that's inside of us came from somewhere else. This world, this universe is not from where it originates. It is from somewhere else. And that universe experienced time, quite differently than we do, which is why, you're able to move in and out of it, really at will. If you take just, if you want to take it as a bubble, I mean, usually I throw it out there as a stack time theory, moving up and down the stack. Here within the simulation, but if you go outside of it, I'm knocking into the microphone. If you go outside of it, not only can you can see the whole stack, of course, the whole thing is right there for you to look at and kind of go in at will. A couple of comments here. Yeah, Plato's allegory of the cave comes to mind. The Earth is an intelligent entity. It's bound to be really irritated. Well, yeah, absolutely, and could be an argument for the Akashic records. Yeah. A little while ago when we were talking about that, absolutely. So all right. I think that is going to wrap it up for this evening. I know this was a little bit of a different day for us to go live. We'll be back again next week, next Wednesday, our normal time, and we'll pick it up, of course, 8:00 p.m. connecteduniverseportal.com. See y'all again next time, if time really exists.